In the quiet stillness of the night, beneath a sky sprinkled with a million stars, a man sat alone in deep thought. His heart was heavy, burdened with struggles no one could see. Life had tested him in ways he never imagined. Loss, betrayal, and endless hardships had left him questioning everything. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, his soul longed for answers, for a sign, for a whisper of hope in the silence. As he closed his eyes, his heart echoed a verse he had once heard but never truly understood. Asterisk watu izu, mantasha watu zilu mantasha. Asterisk. The words carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Allah gives honor to whom He wills, and He humiliates whom He wills. Was this the answer he had been searching for? Could it be that every fall, every loss, every tear was part of a greater plan? Just then, an unexpected voice broke through his thoughts. It was Hafiz Jalabid Qadri, a man whose words had the power to melt even the hardest of hearts. His presence alone carried wisdom, as if he had seen the depths of human sorrow and found light within it. But what he was about to say next would change everything. Would the man finally find peace? Or was there still one more test waiting for him? Hafiz Jalabib Qadri took a deep breath and looked at the man with eyes that carried both sorrow and wisdom. He had seen many people lost in the storms of life, struggling to understand why fate had turned against them. He knew this man's pain, not because he had lived his life, but because suffering had a language of its own, one that needed no words. Sitting beside him, Hafiz Jalabib spoke softly. "Do you think you are alone in your struggles? Do you believe Allah has forgotten you?" The man didn't answer. His throat tightened as emotions swirled within him. He had spent countless nights crying in silence, waiting for a sign that never seemed to come. He had begged for relief, yet life only became harder. Hafiz Jalabib continued, Asterisk watu izu mantasha watu zilu, mantasha asterisk. Allah raises whom He wills and lowers whom He wills. Do you know what that means? The man finally looked up, his eyes filled with questions. It means, Hafiz Jalabib said, that every trial, every moment of pain, is part of something greater. Sometimes we are broken so we can be rebuilt into something stronger. The words lingered in the air. The man wanted to believe them, but how could he, when all he had known was loss? The man lowered his gaze, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the cold ground. "I've tried," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've prayed, I've begged, but nothing changes. Every time I stand up, life knocks me down again. Maybe I'm just not meant for happiness." Hafiz Jalabid watched him closely. He had heard these words before, seen this hopelessness in others, but he knew faith was not about seeing results immediately. It was about holding on, even in the darkness. He leaned in slightly and said, "Do you know the story of Yusuf as? He was thrown into a well by his own brothers, sold as a slave, imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. If anyone had the right to question life, it was him. Yet he never lost hope in Allah's plan." The man let out a bitter laugh. "But I am not a prophet. I am just me, a man who keeps failing." Hafiz Jalabib sighed. "And do you think Allah only writes great stories for prophets? Every believer has a story, a journey, a test. Some are lifted in ease, others through hardship. But in the end, the honor belongs to those who trust Him." The night wind carried his words like a gentle whisper, but the storm inside the man's heart was far from over. A past mistake haunted him, one he had never spoken of. Could he really believe that mercy still existed for someone like him? The man clenched his fists, his heart pounding as memories surfaced, ones he had buried deep, hoping they would disappear. He had made mistakes, some that could never be undone. People had turned away from him, whispered behind his back, judged him for the choices he wished he could erase. And maybe they were right. Maybe he didn't deserve another chance. Hafiz Jalabib could see the battle raging within him. He waited a moment before speaking, his voice steady. "Tell me, do you believe Allah's mercy is smaller than your sins?" The man flinched. No one had ever asked him that before, He had always believed in Allah's mercy, for others, not for himself. His silence was enough of an answer. Hafiz Jalabib leaned closer. Shaitan wants you to believe that you are beyond forgiveness, that you are too broken, too lost. But remember, the same Allah who forgave the murderer who repented, the same Allah who lifted a sinner to Jannah for giving water to a thirsty dog, do you really think he would abandon you? The man's chest tightened. Could it be true? Could there still be hope for him? But before he could respond, a voice called his name from the darkness. He froze. That voice, he hadn't heard it in years. It was someone from his past, and in that moment, he knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The man's breath caught in his throat. That voice, it was unmistakable. He turned slowly, his heart pounding, half expecting his mind to be playing tricks on him. But there, standing just beyond the dim glow of a street lamp, was someone he thought he would never see again. His past had come back to face him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, buried regrets, and wounds that had never healed. The man's hands trembled. He had prayed for a way forward, for a sign, but never had he imagined this. Hafiz Jalabib sensed the shift in the air. He watched as the stranger stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You have been searching for answers," Hafiz Jalabib said gently. "Maybe this is part of it." The man swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had spent years trying to outrun his past, convincing himself that some doors were better left closed. But now, face to face with the very person tied to his greatest regret, he could feel the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The stranger finally spoke, voice laced with emotion. "I never thought I'd see you again." The man's pulse quickened. Was this a chance for redemption, or was this the moment his past would finally catch up to him? The man's throat tightened. 1,000 apologies formed in his mind, but none of them felt enough. He had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed what he would say if he ever got the chance. But now, standing face to face with someone he had wronged, words failed him. The stranger took a step closer, his face unreadable. "You disappeared," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You left without a word. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" The man lowered his gaze, guilt pressing down on him like a weight he could no longer carry. "I thought it was the only way," he murmured. "I thought, maybe if I stayed away, it would hurt less." The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, to his surprise, the stranger exhaled sharply, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "You think running makes the pain go away?" He shook his head. "I spent years hating you, but tonight, when I saw you sitting here, I realized something." The man looked up, his heart pounding. "What?" The stranger's eyes softened. "I realized I needed to let go. Not for you, but for me." The words struck deeper than any anger ever could. The man had braced himself for punishment, for rejection, but forgiveness, he hadn't expected that. Just then, Hafiz Jalabib placed a hand on his shoulder. "Allah's mercy is always there," he said gently. "Sometimes he even places it in the hearts of those we least expect." The man felt something shift inside him, an ache he had carried for years, slowly loosening its grip. But before he could respond, the stranger reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, something familiar. "I kept this," he said, holding it out. The man's breath hitched. It was a reminder of the past, something he thought had been lost forever. His hands shook as he reached for it, and in that moment he realized, some wounds heal in ways we never see coming. The man held the small object in his hands, his fingers tracing its worn edges. It was something from a time when things were simpler, before mistakes, before regrets. His chest tightened as memories flooded back, but for the first time, they didn't feel like chains pulling him down. They felt like lessons, pieces of a journey that had brought him here. He looked up at the stranger, searching for the right words. "I don't know how to fix the past," he admitted, "but if there's any way to make things right, I want to try." The stranger studied him for a moment, then nodded. Maybe we can't change what happened, he said, his voice softer now. But we can decide what happens next. He looked up at the stranger, searching for the right words. I don't know how to fix the past, he admitted, but if there's any way to make things right, I want to try. The stranger studied him for a moment, then nodded. Maybe we can't change what happened, he said, his voice softer now. But we can decide what happens next. Hafiz Jalabid watched the exchange with a quiet smile. That is the beauty of life, he said. No matter how lost we feel, Allah always gives us a path back. The man exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in years. He had spent so long believing he was beyond forgiveness, beyond hope. But tonight had shown him otherwise. As the night deepened around them, he realized that sometimes the hardest journey is not finding a way forward.